Pittsburgh Steelers fans, what is going on this Friday evening? I am Michael Beck, your host of the Live Mic. It is my pleasure to join you each and every Friday night. And we got some great Steelers stuff going on. I'm going to have some fun conversation tonight, so I'm excited to have each and every one of you along on the ride with me. Kicking things off with a little bit of news. Nothing super huge, but the Steelers did work out DeAndre Tompkins earlier today. If you recognize that name, it is because he was a Penn State alumni. I don't believe he has any relations to Cambrell Tompkins, the former Patriots receiver that had a bit of a drop and fumbling problem. But anyway, DeAndre played in the XFL last year for the DC Defenders. He also tried out for the Jets earlier in the offseason. But the Steelers did decide to bring back one Mr. Saeed Blacknall today and cutting James Lockhart to fit him onto the roster. So I don't know if DeAndre Tompkins is going to still be signed here, but I'm kind of leaning to the direction that it probably won't happen after the signing of or re-signing, I should say, of Saeed Blacknall. Today we got a fun little topic, kind of an eye to the future, as well as talking about what these guys got to do this season here. We're going to break down kind of the top offensive and defensive free agents of 2021 in the Steelers team, and guys that we'll see what they kind of need to do to kind of get another contract here in Pittsburgh. So for you guys that are already in the live chat now, I'm curious to know your thoughts on who's the one free agent you think this team cannot afford to lose. So shoot that in the live chat. We'll run through some of those throughout the show. So getting things started off, I think part one here today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the defensive guys. There is a long list of Steelers that are going to be free agents in 2021. And there's going to be a lot of impact players. I think even before I start this list, I should say that Kevin Colbert, I believe was yesterday or 2 days ago, was asked about the salary cap and the potential of it dropping to $175 million from 198, what it is this season. And if that's the case, Kevin Colbert, I should say, did kind of almost gave a non-answer, but kind of reaffirmed to me that it's almost like all the GMs are kind of worried, because he basically just said everyone's in the same situation, which is true. Every single NFL team is going to have to make some really, really tough decisions this offseason, but it's not like the NFL is just going to allow every single one of their players to end up free agents. Like any quality player just sitting in the free agency pool this year just isn't going to happen. Especially if a bunch of these guys just kind of decide to kind of spite everyone, and then the two teams with a ton of cap space next year, even if the cap were to drop, is the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really want to see the Patriots sign all these all-pro, Pro Bowl players to $1 million deals, because they're the only team that can offer them that contract. So I'm a little bit worried in that sense. But I don't think the NFL is going to allow that to really happen. There's going to be some sort of situation, maybe a renegotiation with the Players Association, in a way to kind of figure out a way to kind of reduce everyone's salaries, so everyone can still play in the league. You don't want your star players not playing. And if that means the veteran minimum drops 10%, or every single contract that's still signed drops 10%, then that's probably what's going to happen, just because the NFLPA is going to want all their guys getting paid. They're not just going to settle for anything less. And I don't think the owners would really want to see all these guys as free agents either. But if in some weird situation, these guys are just kind of hooped in 2021, and then just hoping the cap bounces back in 2022, we're going to see a mass exodus of Steelers players. And for that reason, this year could be that, and I hate to say all or nothing year, because there's some potential that a ton of all-pro, former all-pro, Pro Bowl type players could be off this team, which it's not helping anyone. And especially when you look at teams that have quarterbacks on deals on their rookie deal, those are the teams that are going to survive this no problem. We got Ben Roethlisberger at $42 million cap hit in 2021. That's a little bit worrisome. And that's absorbing so much of the space that if it were to drop, like there's some rumors saying that it will, then there's not going to be a lot of room left for these guys. So kind of kicking off some of these free agents, we're going to start on the defensive side. Like I said a little bit earlier, we're going to start off with TJ's running mate, one Mr. Bud Dupree. It's really interesting to see what's going to happen with Bud. Of course, there was that kind of rumor that kind of floated around earlier this week that the Steelers were sniffing around Jadeveon Clowney and potentially bringing him in. That would have to be involved with the Steelers trading Bud Dupree. I don't think that's going to happen, but I still think this is going to be Bud Dupree's final season in Pittsburgh, no matter what happens here. It's just one of those tough spots. They just can't afford to bring everyone back. So in this situation, I think Bud Dupree breaking out kind of hurt his chances of staying in Pittsburgh because he did leave a fairly big impact. And the way the guys are getting paid nowadays, like you even see Budda Baker, the Cardinals just throwing around money like they don't really care about what will happen in 2021. Bud Dupree could see $16 million multi-year deal, which I know the Steelers weren't willing to offer. So that's a little that's just too much money for this team. It won't work. So unfortunately, the writing is already on the wall. They drafted Alex Highsmith in the 3rd round for a reason. He is the heir apparent to that spot. They're going to work him in. Of course, Ola Denny, another free agent coming up this year, has been having a great training camp. So potentially he could win that spot, but they got to be able to sign him too. But that could be one of those situations where a few years ago now, the Steelers decided to take and re-sign one Antonio Brown over a Mike Wallace, who's unproven, but at the time was showing some good stuff in his development and moving forward in his career. So there's some potential that Ola Denny could be the guy in that spot in 2021 over guys like Bud Dupree and Ola Denny. But I think the writing is on the wall for old Bud. If he could have a year like Ezra saying in the chat here, 13 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and an interception, that would be huge. If he could give us a year like that, he's probably getting close to $20 million a year. The Steelers are going to have nowhere near that amount of cap space, even without signing any of these guys. So if Bud can have that kind of year, he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid somewhere else. It'll be sad to see him go, especially because the Steelers were so patient with him, and he finally hit it. He took off in stride, and he's earned himself a future in the NFL. And if he can continue to roll on like he did last year and even improve, that only makes this top-ranked defense across the entire NFL that much better. Speaking of that top-ranked defense and where they kind of get their leadership from, Mr. Cam Hayward. This is a really, really interesting deal for me. I think we all want it to get done, but the fact is Cam's 31 years old. And if you're deciding, okay, we're going to have to pay Cam somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million a year, that's not an exaggeration. We've been seeing the deals of guys like Grady Jarrett, Aaron Donald, Chris Jones. I firmly believe Cam Hayward's the second best interior defensive lineman in football, only behind Aaron Donald. So if he's going to be getting paid that amount of money, that might start to affect what you have to give to TJ, what you have to give to Minka. There's just so many other mouths that have to get fed down the pipeline. I hate to say it, but at 31 years old, it's almost like that kind of Patriot adage where they let their star players walk. They don't care. They sign huge deals, and then they just pick up 3 or 4 third-round picks in compensatory and draft more great players. They do it year in, year out. And it frustrates the hell out of me because every year when they announce the compensatory selections, the Patriots somehow go 13-3, and then they get 4 third-round compensatory picks. In one sense, it's like it doesn't make sense. How could they be that good but losing so much talent? But then you realize they're drafting 12 players a year, and they have by far the most compensatory selections across the entire league, some cases combined. So in this sense, it would be a really, really hard move to see Cam sign. Like I would have a feeling in the pit of my stomach if I saw Cam Hayward sign with another team. But it's one of those moves that it makes your future a little more difficult. I don't know if you can give Cam a 5-year deal. If it's a 2-3-year deal, I'm all for it. But he really only has one more big payday left in him, especially at his position and what he does. So I think there's a really, really, really good chance that he's probably going to want to take the most amount of money that he can make, because he's been on fairly team-friendly contracts his entire career. Of course, the first 5 years is the 31st overall pick in the draft. They don't get paid a ton, even though he did come out in that era before that last CBA, when the rookie contracts were a little bit more inflated. It's tough to say, but I wouldn't be mad at Cam for signing for more money elsewhere. It's one of the things that I've always kind of thought, like, if you worked for company A for $15 an hour and company B comes along and says, we want to pay you $22 an hour, I think we're all going to take that deal. And I take that the same way to professional athletes. If someone's just going to offer them so much more money, or if they offer them a deal in their home state, I really couldn't blame them for doing that in the slightest. So in that sense, I hope Cam gets re-signed. I don't know if it gets done, unfortunately. It would be brutal. I know a lot of us would hate that, but when you look at what has to come down the pipeline in the future, if the Steelers can hang on to Cam Hayward for 3 years or less, I think that's the perfect situation. So moving on with that, because I think that would be the toughest loss to handle, and it would be more than that. That's the unfortunate side of this upcoming offseason. The Steelers they're gonna have to lose star players, and it's not just gonna be one. It's probably not just gonna be two. It could be more than three, and that really kind of makes me sick a little bit. Ezra, here's who do you pick to let go, Cam or Juju? I'd always go with the receiver in that situation, because especially with the rise of 7-on-7, you see way more talented wide receivers popping up way more often. But in this sense, honestly, I see a situation where both guys end up having to go, just because there isn't the money for either of them. And to lose two fan favorites like that in one offseason would be a brutal pill to swallow, but it's one that I think we need to be prepared to have happen. Just moving along down our list here, and just sticking with the D-line, the Steelers just traded for Chris Wormley. He's someone that could be a potential replacement if Cam were to go away, but he's a free agent too. And this is one of those things, when the Steelers traded for Nick Van Nett a year ago, they gave up a 5th-round pick, and then they didn't re-sign him. To me, what's the point in doing that? Like, a Luke Wilson, who was immediately signed by Seattle after they traded him away, would have given you the same production without losing that pick. Now, there were rumors that the Steelers really love Van Nett. They were trying to trade for him for years after trying to draft him, but came up just shy when the Seahawks did. I don't understand the move. And then when Pittsburgh's trading a 5th for Chris Wormley, and then the Ravens turn around and turn a 5th for Calais Campbell, I know it's a little backwards there, but that's a little worrisome, especially if they can't re-sign Wormley. That would just be a brutal trade. Wormley this year, unless there's injuries, isn't going to play a ton. He'll get his snaps, but he's not someone that's going to come in and steal Stephon Tuitt or Cam Hayward's job. But as Russ Obenstein says in our live chat here, I think Wormley may not even make the roster. There's potential that might not even happen, which would be sickening when you give up a draft pick for literally nothing. But Wormley's been hurt. He's been standing on the side a lot. There's been talk to Savon Walker, the former XFLer, who's also a free agent coming up in 2021. I'm telling you, this list is insanely long. But he's looked good, and he could steal a spot. And then you keep going down that defensive line list. Big Dan McCullers, who kind of got called out by Keith Butler. I think it was today. I'm already getting my day screwed up. It's Friday. I promise I haven't been in the cervezas yet, but Dan McCullers, he's been around. This will be year 7, and he pretty much has an unchallenged job. He's going to be nose tackle on this team, but can he continue his 7-year run? Like, honestly, to me, it's almost a meme. It's funny that he's stayed around for so long, and he only has 21 career solo tackles, which is funny. Honestly, he's averaging 3 tackles a year, and he's played 7 years in the NFL. Without the Steelers just deciding, like, all right, maybe we need something fresh in here. But you can probably move on from Dan. But if you lose Cam, if Wormley doesn't pan out, if Savon has a great year and he ends up signing elsewhere on a huge deal, are you stuck re-signing Dan McCullers and being like, here's a whole lot more playing time? I would hate to see that happen, but there's a scenario where all this pans out. And I don't want to be like a fear-mongering guy, but this season is super important, I think, to this team because there's going to be a mass turnover. And I think there's going to be a lot of turnover around the entire NFL and a bit of a rebalancing of sorts just because there isn't any money to be had. I think the owners really, if they want the NFL to have some sort of consistency, they really got to put up this year. Or I should say next year. They gotta eat it. And honestly, like, to these billionaires, when the cap, like, at the very least, keep it a flat cap at $198 million. Like, I know the TV deal hasn't come through yet, but it will. It's the NFL. It's the biggest sport in North America. So if they just ate an extra $20 million in 2021, that potentially, I think, could go a long way in protecting every single franchise and keeping these guys on their teams that they should be in. I couldn't even imagine if there's a situation where no one could afford Cam Hayward's services, and then the Patriots are like, hey, we have $7 million. Come on over. And that, like, you couldn't blame the guy if you wanted to play in the NFL. His options are play in New England or sit on your couch. I think he's going to go play. And if that's the case, I think owners of other teams would be like, you know what, maybe we are willing to shell out a little bit more money this year. So something crazy and ridiculous doesn't happen like that. Or we don't have like a free agent team that could win the Super Bowl if they were actually playing. So something's got to happen. Something's got to give. But getting back to our list of our defensive players, another defensive lineman, Tyson Alualu. He's someone who could be potentially on the last year of his career on the whole. I believe he's the third oldest or second oldest member of this team behind Ben. I want to say there's someone else, but he might even be the second oldest player on this team. He's had a crazy long run in the NFL. I think this is his 11th season. And that if the Steelers lose Cam and then losing Tyson, who honestly, I think Tyson Alualu, anytime there's been an injury, he stepped up and he's produced. And I've never worried if a defensive end went down or any defensive lineman because he slipped right back in and was produced fine. So if he chooses to retire, so be it. It would be a definite loss in my opinion. But the Steelers got to find a way to bring back at least 2 of those defensive linemen, at least. And if they want their Super Bowl window to stay open with Ben Roethlisberger, you got to get guys around him. This great defense could be stripped apart a little bit by this lack of a salary cap in 2021. The defensive backfield. Well, I should move back one position less to start off with here. The linebackers really only losing Bud Dupree. Robert Spillane is also a free agent in 2021. He's going to be a pretty key special teamer this year. I just forgot I forgot his stat, but in like 6 games that he played last year, I want to say he had like 11 special teams tackles, something ridiculous. And he's good. He's probably going to be the 4th linebacker on this roster. And he's going to be someone that potentially should be brought back just because their impact on special teams just kind of changes that flipping the field, as some might say. So that's really it for the linebacker side. The hardest hit here on defense, by far, the defensive line. There are a few names in the defensive backfield, however, namely the first one on top, Mike Hilton. He's been arguably the best slot nickel corner in the NFL since he broke out, since he was undrafted by the Patriots and then signed by the Steelers. One of their few misses. They're usually the team that cleans up on those guys, but Mike Hilton, his loss would be huge, just because the Steelers have never really found a guy that's played that role. There really hasn't ever been a guy that I can think of that has played that role like Mike Hilton has, where he can come down in the running game, rack up some sacks, help out in coverage, be a backup at safety. He can bump out a corner if you need him. I know the team would go other ways before that, but if you needed it, he could do it. Mike Hilton's a Mr. all-around. His loss would be huge as well to this team, but I think one that it would be an easier pill to swallow, because the team could take their defense in a couple different directions. If it meant between saving Cam Hayward's job in Pittsburgh, I think they're making that move. But Hilton is going to be in an interesting situation here. He's one of those guys that isn't in your extreme core, but he's still really, really good to this team, and he runs his job very well. Losing him would be tough, but it is a potential spot that can happen, and the team would be all right, I think. It's almost like a gadget player on the defensive side, if that makes any sense, just because he's a Swiss Army knife, and he does a lot of things really well. And he really is. He's one of those guys that when he steps out on the field, he can make a play in so many different ways. Defensive lineman's not normally getting an interception. A free safety isn't normally getting a sack. Mike Hilton is a guy who can get a sack one play and then pick you off the next. And that's just the way he plays the game. So losing Mike would be one of those players that really changes your defense and how you run stuff just based on how he plays the game. But it's something that might have to have happen. Another guy that he's kind of competing with for a little bit of snaps here is Cam Sutton, who's been also getting a ton of praise in training camp. Because who hasn't? The Steelers have been getting a ton of praise this year at training camp. So before we get in a rant in that, I'll keep on the Sutton talk, but the Steelers Super Bowl 2020, watch out for it. Cam Sutton, getting back. He is someone who Keith Butler has really raved about. He's Mr. All Around the Field right now. He's a primary backup outside a corner. He's competing with Mike Hilton for slot reps, especially in more passing situations, because the guy, he can line up on anyone, and he follows around the field, and he's a shutdown backup corner. It's something you don't really hear, but he's someone who's extremely talented. And if the Steelers decided they had to clear up some cap space by getting rid of some vets, Joe Hayden's the guy that's making over $7 million a year. And if you cut him, it's pretty much the entire savings, the whole thing. So I love Joe, but that's a potential move. If it meant getting Cam Sutton back for $2 million a year, and you're able to keep Cam and you're able to keep a couple of these guys on offense, I wouldn't want to lose Joe Hayden. But again, it's one of those things where you got to keep your team young. Like, you can't start relying on guys that are regressing at the end of their careers, but it's a potential move that could happen. And if it were to, that would be pretty brutal, but it's something I think we need to potentially be prepared for. Continuing with another defensive back, Jordan Dangerfield, that's another special teamer. Like Robert Spillane, he's going to win his job based on what he can do in that role on the third phase of the game. Kicking it back a little bit, both Ezra saying, please do not cut Joe. Ryan O'Toole, Joe is still producing at a high level. I completely agree. Joe Hayden, he has not lost a step yet. The thing is, though, it happens to everyone. I guess if your name isn't Tom Brady, but everyone else, at some point they start to regress. And if you're signing guys into the future where some of those years that they might still be those big time producers, but say it's a 6-year deal, and the last 4 they just regress until they're basically a backup, but you're paying them to be a top 4 guy at their position, it hurts your team. And sometimes you just, There was a term in journalism school that it sounds pretty dark, but when you have to cut a clip that you really loved, but it doesn't fit your story, our teachers would say you got to kill your babies. You got to get rid of those things that you love. It makes it better, even though that thing that you view as your best piece, it doesn't make the collective better. And in a roundabout way, it's something that comes to NFL team building, and it's something that guys that hit their 30s, guys have to kind of get moved in and moved out, and it's unfortunate, but you got to keep your team's age, your average age, younger than 30. Otherwise, it's a bunch of old guys that aren't quite as fast anymore. But it's one of those moves, I'm telling you, we have to be prepared for as fans. If it meant keeping a Cam and some other name or other names, I think it's a move the team would consider. And that's just something we need to be a little prepared for. One more defensive player before we flip over to part two. One who's also having a great camp is Marcus Allen. If you haven't heard, he's playing like that Mark Barron role from a year ago, and he's been excelling at it in camp, which is really good to hear because he was one of my picks to be a for sure cut this year. But it sounds like he is someone that is going to find a niche for himself on this team. The same way Mark Barron moved up from safety to inside linebacker, looks like that's what Marcus Allen's going to do as well. And if he can really grab the bull by the horns on that, I believe he was a 6th round pick. That's huge. That's great value. If he can land on this team and do something really well, and if he can succeed in that role better than what he did, I think that would be an outstanding spot for him. He hasn't showed it yet, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Like Brad Jewett says here, missed it. Oh no, I missed it again. Michael, he got cooked yesterday by Benny Snell for 3 out of 4 reps. Backs on backers drill, I believe it was. I think he's been more successful in the passing game, is where the reviews are coming from. Not so much as a blitzer, but maybe a little more spirited effort in the passing game than compared to one Mark Barron, who at times was lost and at other times lazy. And with that, I think we'll kick it over to the offensive side. So if you are listening on our podcast platform, make sure to catch part 2 and flip over. As always, my name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Flipping things over for part 2 here. We are talking about the offensive free agents. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet on defensive players on our podcast platform, you can also check that one out. You are listening to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com radio. I am your host, Michael Beck of the Live Mic. And it's fun, as always, to be sitting here at the live chat. Something I asked really early in the show, what's the one free agent you guys wouldn't want to have leave if you could save one guy? Logan says Cam, as in Cam Hayward. Gyro says Cam or Juju. Steelers Pittsburgh says Cam. I'm sensing a bit of a theme. Logan says I'd put Mike Hilton pretty high on that list too. Ezra says we absolutely need to re-sign Juju, and a whole lot more like that. So it's I think it's one of those things where I think a whole lot of teams are going to be split. Not teams, fans, I should say. A whole lot of fans will be split on who to keep and who to let go. I think we're going to see more of the names that are let go on the offensive side, because that's kind of what the team prepared for this offseason. When they drafted Alex Highsmith, to me, that meant this is probably the end of the road for Bud Dupree. When they drafted Chase Claypool, I thought to myself, if he can take off, I know they don't typically play the same position, but if he takes off, he'll slide in the Z spot at receiver. James Washington will slide over into a Juju slot role. And then when it came to drafting Anthony McFarland, I thought to myself, well, the Steelers have 4 guys that are probably going to make this team at running back. They usually only bring 3. What does that mean for James Conner's future? And I don't think that one's very, very bright as well, especially with how the team has conducted business. they don't re-sign running backs and they don't re-sign wide receivers. When their contracts, their rookie deals expire, they say, thank you for your service. We are choosing to move on. And then they drafted another guy. And the Steelers have been so good at drafting receivers specifically that they've been able to do this. The thing is, at some point, some of these guys are going to be missed on. It's just the nature of the game. And when that happens, I think the Steelers are going to really kind of to hurt when it comes to that philosophy. So there is going to be a time, I really do think, when they see one of these guys at camp and they're like, oh, maybe he's not the next coming of Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe he's not the next Antonio Brown. So then they decide, like, maybe we should re-sign this guy and maybe not draft another wide receiver this year. So that's a potential move for the future. But with that said, with the amount of love that Chase Claypool's getting, kicking things off at the very top, one Mr. Juju Smith-Schuster, I think this is the end of the road for him. If he were to have a really down year again, I think for that reason he'd be out. I think if he has a spectacular year like in 2018, he'd be out because he'd price himself off the team. I think the only way one Juju Smith-Schuster remains a Pittsburgh Steeler is if he has a really average year, say 1,000 yards, which would be great. Don't get me wrong. Maybe 4 touchdowns, nothing eye-popping. And the other teams in the league, I should say, are feeling the pinch, and they say, well, maybe we don't need to add an average receiver. So I think that's the only case that we can see one Juju Smith-Schuster return on another deal, but it is a possible one, especially depending on how this team figures out to pass the ball around. And I think what's going to happen here is if the Steelers do well in the playoffs, I think all the players instantly pass themselves in more money wise, and we'll probably see a lot of guys kind of price themselves out of the Steelers market, which is frustrating, but it's something we're going to have to live with again, I say. But when it comes to one Mr. Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't really see a world where he comes back. The Steelers, I can't remember. I think it was Hines Ward was the last one before him, but the Steelers don't offer wide receivers a second contract. Like when you look back at it, Mike Wallace, no. Santonio Holmes, no. Plaxico Burress, no. Emmanuel Sanders, no. Like all these guys, Martavis Bryant, he was traded, but probably no. It's just how it ends up. I don't know. I don't know if the Steelers are ever going to waver from that philosophy if they don't find someone who is a contender for league MVP like Antonio Brown was, and someone that they built an offense around, really. So unless it's a rare circumstance, I just don't see them re-signing this guy. And it pains me to say that because I think Juju is so young and he showed so much in his first 2 seasons that he's absolutely earned a second contract. And if they gave him a 6-year deal, he won't even be 30 years old when it expired. That's the insane thing to me. He could be 10 years in the league and he wouldn't even be 30 years old. He just broke out so young that he is definitely a special player in that sense. The Steelers might be able to get him on a prove-it deal if he is below average, but I just can't see that happening with Ben Roethlisberger back. They have the best chemistry of all the receivers on the team. So I think Juju, I hate to say it, but I think that's one of the guys that you have to let walk so you can afford a guy like a Cam Hayward or some of these other guys that we're going to list in a few moments here. But that's the one I'm going to be most prepared for. If he's willing to take a team-friendly deal, then I think you do it then. But team-friendly is still like $10 million. And this Steelers team, if the cap is $175 million, will be $17 million in the negative. They got to make all that money up plus $10 million, and then you're still losing all your free agents. You see where this is tough. So I think what him personally comes down to is what happens in 2020. And if Juju's not a Steeler in 2021, I'd be sad. But it's just the Steelers' philosophy. They don't re-sign wide receivers, so I wouldn't be holding my breath if that's this situation. Next guy I want to touch on, actually, one Mr. Vance Mcdonald. He is technically a free agent, but the Steelers have a club option. But that's like, I want to say it's in the $7.5 million range. Another deal the Steelers can't afford, especially because Eric Ebron's deal goes from a $2 million cap hit to an $8 million cap hit. And he potentially could be someone that gets cut. But I can't see the Steelers just letting all their tight ends walk. Vance McDonald hasn't shown too much. He hasn't really proven that he's worth that kind of money. And if that's the case and he walks, that's all right. But the Steelers have not been able to draft a tight end. You look up and down their roster for the last number of years. Since Heath Miller, they've struggled to find a tight end. Jesse James was fine. He got a humongous payday in Detroit, which still boggles my mind, especially because they proceeded to not use him whatsoever in 2019. He was the next best, and I would say he's a league average tight end at best. And even with that, when you look at what he did last year, I'd say he's a league below average tight end. And if he wasn't on such a gigantic deal, I think he'd be a candidate to be getting cut right now in Detroit. I think the only reason why he wasn't cut this offseason is because his guaranteed money and his cap hit, if he's not on the team, that dead money is freaking huge, and they couldn't afford to eat that and not have the player on the team. So getting back to Vance McDonald, he had his option picked up this year. I don't think it's going to happen again next year. I think the Steelers just have so many other weapons, and especially even if they do lose Juju, if they don't cut Eric Ebron, then they're going to have they're still going to have Chase Claypool, still going to have Deontay Johnson, still going to have James Washington, who had his best games when Juju wasn't in the lineup, which is something interesting and something to look out for. And of course, they'd also have Eric Ebron, so they still would have weapons. And Vance is someone who has struggled to stay on the field, and I don't know if you can afford to pay someone to stand on the sideline. As Ryan says, if Ebron gets another injury, the team can't let Van go next season. Oh, you know what? That is true if it's a serious injury, but by all accounts, Eric Ebron's 110% since his ankle surgery a year ago. So that's going to be an interesting thing to kind of watch because he is still under a contract. The Steelers just got to decide what they want to do with it, penalty free. So if they cut him, basically all that money just goes right back into their bank account. The next spot I really kind of want to look at is the offensive line, because this is really, really interesting. There's a few guys that have their deals coming up, and the Steelers are going to have to decide to let some of them walk. The biggest one, of course, is your starting left tackle in Alejandro Villanueva. I think he's one guy that may also retire. 31 years old. I know he hasn't played too long in the league, but I believe he didn't return to the NFL until he was 26 because of his military service in the Rangers. So I think Big Al is someone who obviously struggled a lot last year, but he also played against some of the best pass rushers that the NFL had to offer. So he definitely is due for a bounce back season, but that doesn't necessarily mean he is due to re-sign another contract. Another guy is the other right tackle, Zach Banner. And whatever happens to Alejandro Villanueva, I think the opposite is going to happen with Banner, because the third guy who still has 1 year after 2020 season is Chuks Okorafor. He's going to be starting at left or right tackle next year, depending on who the Steelers move on from. If Chuks Okorafor wins the right tackle job at training camp, then I would kind of expect the Steelers to potentially re-sign Zach Banner and move him to left tackle. Or if Banner wins the right tackle spot, then Chuks is playing the swing tackle, learning both sides, and then he moves into that left tackle spot. But then if Al is re-signed, you probably got to let Banner walk just because you don't have the space. You don't have the money, and you don't have the roster spot to keep a guy like that around a whole nother year. The only offensive lineman that I think the Steelers are guaranteed to re-sign, but they just got to be able to afford, Matt Feiler. He was arguably the best guard or offensive lineman for that matter. And he did play right tackle. He was the best offensive lineman the Steelers had in 2019. And David DeCastro and Marquise Pouncey were still really good football players. Matt Feiler was just really consistent, and he really put on a show last year, especially when he moved to guard and really kind of shut down Aaron Donald. I know Aaron still got his plays, but in my opinion, he's the best player in football, and you really can only hope to contain whoever has that designation of being the best player in the league. So, with that in mind, Matt Feiler played him as good as anyone did, and I'm really excited to see him move back to guard. I think the Steelers front three, if Marquise Pouncey can show what he did in more so 2018. Have his snaps placement a little bit better. I think that interior three offensive lineman could be the best interior three in the league. And then if Allen, whoever the right tackle is, kind of step back to form with having a little bit more chemistry with your quarterback behind you, the Steelers offensive line shoots right back up to being one of the best in the NFL, which is funny to think about because the Steelers arguably have the best defense in the NFL. If everything goes right, they're going to have one of the best offensive lines in football. They still got Ben Roethlisberger, who, if he's healthy, is probably a top 10 quarterback still. And then when you look at their skill positions, they're as good as any. So it's hard not to fawn over this team, but they really are that talented, and they really can be that good. And then it's one of those things that makes me worry about next year because we could potentially lose a lot of these guys, and especially the offensive line. The Steelers have to realize that Ben's going to be on the roster next year unless for some reason they're able to trade him, which would be really the most sickening thing I could ever imagine as a sports fan. I felt sick to my stomach when some guys signed to other teams in the past, when some guys get traded away. But if Ben Roethlisberger were to be traded as a cap casualty because the Steelers are $20 million in the hole and they have to sign a draft class and they have to bring back all these players, and Ben just wasn't as healthy as he was, I still would feel absolutely sick to my stomach if that were to happen. But he's going to be on this team next year, and I should say 2 years from now, and you're going to have to protect him. He's only getting older. Of course, that elbow surgery is absolutely massive, and you want to limit the hits he takes. So, as Ezra says, we are definitely going O-line in the first round. I completely agree. Pro Football Focus agrees as well. In their first mock draft of 2021, I believe the gentleman's name is Trey Smith. He is a guard out of Tennessee. Actually, he has played all 5 positions at Tennessee. He missed a season. I believe he battled something significant, but I am blanking on what it was. But Pro Football Focus did project the Steelers to be drafting an offensive lineman in 2021 to help protect Ben Roethlisberger. And I think that's something that's going to happen, as well as the team pulling out a couple extra stops to make sure their O-line stays as intact as it possibly can. So with the offensive line guys out of the way, I want to touch on one Mr. James Conner. Mr. Connor Strong, Mr. Pittsburgh, Mr. Western PA. He's played his whole career from college to Pop Warner to the NFL. He's played it all in Western PA, and it really kind of feels like this is going to be the last year that he could be a member of the Steelers and someone who calls his home field a stadium that is in Western Pennsylvania. So James Conner is in a very interesting season, and I think it's going to be a super slippery slope to see what ends up going on there, because the Steelers have so many running backs that they drafted behind him. And James Conner, of course, with his injury problems in the past, and with the percentages of starting running backs across the entire NFL making it through a full season, full 16 games, being about, I believe only like 30% of running backs make it, starting running backs make it all 16 games. At some point, he's probably going to miss a game this year. The odds are just not in his favor. So I think he's someone that we could potentially lose. I don't think the Steelers draft Anthony McFarland if they're not at least worried about that happening. But the thing is, with the running back spot, you can draft someone and you can kind of plug them into your lineup fairly quickly. just because the position does translate pretty well. And if you find someone that can pass block, that can catch passes out of the backfield and run the tight zone or the gap run game, I think then there's someone that you could really kind of slot in day one. So to see what will happen with Connor will be interesting. I keep loading up Ezra's comments here, but if we lose James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster, 2017 draft was a wash. Yeah, that 2017 draft was outstanding. Like, you just look at some of those picks. Of course, TJ Watt off the top, who I recently ranked the best first-round pick the Steelers have made with their last 10 first-round draft picks. Go ahead and check that out after you're done listening to the podcast here over on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. But that 2017 draft, yeah, Juju in the second round. Then you got James Conner in the third. Cameron Sutton also in the third. Sutton is someone who's potentially another starter. So that 2017 draft class, if the Steelers are able to re-sign all those guys, if they could play full careers, I'm not saying they're reaching the heights of the 74 draft class, but there is potential that they could be the second best draft class in team history. And there's nothing wrong with that, considering who's sitting atop the mountain. So losing James Conner is another thing I think we as Steelers fans need to kind of keep in the back of our mind, that it could potentially happen. And if any of these moves I had to say were most likely to actually have happen, I think moving on from James Conner is probably that move. And as tough as it is to move on from some of these fan favorites, James Conner is just so much different because, of course, his battles with cancer, how he has been tied locally to this team, how he's respected to his teammates, the drama when he started his career with the whole Le'Veon Bell situation, is anything. He is really one of those players that kind of just gets viewed differently because he's been through so much. He's been through a whole lot more than I have in my life. I can say that without hesitation. He is someone that I only would wish the best for if he were to sign with another team, and I'd hope he'd sign to a team that has a better offensive line than what Le'Veon Bell decided to sign with in New York. Anyway, moving on to our next players here, the quarterbacks. There's two of them. One of them is going to be cut probably within the next 2 weeks here, so it's probably going to be one of these two guys. But Devlin Hodges and Paxton Lynch, both their deals are expiring. And what makes this kind of an interesting situation to look at is I suppose you could offer Devlin another 1-year deal, but is he going to want to do that? Is he going to have offers to be the second backup somewhere else? Potentially. Could he get more money elsewhere? Definitely, because the Steelers aren't going to offer him a penny more than the vet minimum to be a quarterback 3, if that's the situation. When it comes to Paxton Lynch, the reports out of training camp is that he's been absolutely horrible, which caught me off guard because I was picking him to potentially win a spot on this team if the Steelers were to take 3 quarterbacks. But Paxton Lynch, apparently he's been airing the ball over wide receivers, running wide open down the field, putting the ball in the stands, just not having a good camp at all. So it really does feel like if the Steelers are taking 3 quarterbacks, then they are taking 3 in the sense of Devlin Dutch Hodges being the third. So it's going to be an interesting training camp, I would say, for these 3 quarterbacks that are kind of floating around the bottom of the depth chart. I think Mason Rudolph is, by all counts, has had an up and down camp, but has showed better than he's looked bad. So I would say if the Steelers are taking 3, because there's always potential they just take 2, it's going to be Devlin, and then I think he probably signs elsewhere in the offseason, just somewhere that they might need an upgrade at their backup quarterback spot, like a potential Seattle. Who knows? Maybe there just isn't a market for him anymore because the draft class in 2021 is loaded at quarterback. Maybe he comes up to my country in the Great White North and joins the CFL whenever that gets going again, because, of course, our season was completely canceled. So that spot with Devlin will be one to watch, especially next year if he is to make this team. looking at my list here, there's only one more player I want to touch on. I saved him for last because I know our live chat loves talking about Ryan Switzer so much. He's had a pretty good camp from everything I've read, everything I've seen. Ryan Switzer is that that interesting name that I don't really know what to expect out of him this year, because he is getting the ball thrown his way a ton by Ben. They have their chemistry, they're buddies. So he's going to get his reps. He's going to run around the slot a little bit. So Ryan Switzer as a free agent, though, yeah, I don't know. I don't think anyone else is sending him some money. So I think if he's going anywhere, I think he re-ups in Pittsburgh, whether people like it or not. But on a very, very small deal. And he has to produce way better than he did last year. First of all, he's got to make this team. He's got to play that 2018 Ryan Switzer, like just under 400 yards, no drops, no lame behind the screen passes, which I blame that more so on play calling, because Ryan Switzer's not the guy that you're running a screen pass to. So I think he is someone that if he is going to get another deal, it's going to be like a 1 year prove it again type deal. And he's going to have a really, really good 2019 season for that to happen. If I had to predict, I'd say Steelers probably move on from Switzer too. I don't see any of these free agent receivers coming back, to be completely honest. The absolute last person that I want to talk about that is a free agent, one Mr. Head Coach Mike Petaway Tomlin, as Brian Anthony Davis likes to call him. Mike Tomlin is a free agent, and that is going to be I don't know how that's going to end up, just because I think the Steelers obviously love their coaches. I think Mike Tomlin's done a fantastic job. I think he's someone that should have got a little more love in the Coach of the Year conversation a year ago. And if the Steelers win the Super Bowl, say it were to happen, he might even decide to just be like, well, you know what? I've already done this for 13 years. He's going to have a ton of records. He could just decide to retire and retire young. But I don't know if that necessarily happens. Of course, it doesn't count to the salary cap the same way that a player does. But Mike Tomlin, I think the Steelers will re-up him. But that's another name that you have to look out for, as well as Kevin Colbert, who's on his year-to-year deal. If the Steelers are faced with a $175 million cap, though, Colbert just might be like, I'm going to call it a career. I've got a couple of Super Bowl rings, and I don't really want the headache of cutting everyone and being the most hated man in Pittsburgh. That being said, I will leave you with some closing thoughts. Just be prepared for next year that there's going to be some players that are moved away from. It's going to happen. That's the nature of the game. Usually lose a couple of those names every single year. 2021, you're going to see more than usual. Unless something drastic were to happen, I just can't see it happening. I really do expect this team to turn over quite a bit. And I really just hope that they're able to find a way to keep their contributors around the best they can. I really hope they don't have to cut too many guys to keep everyone under the salary cap. So with that being said, I just hope the owners really figure it out and just kind of open up their wallets a little bit more and just let the league survive a little bit better by floating a little bit more cash into the NFL. That being said, all is not lost. The 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers are still a Super Bowl contender, no matter what a Baltimore Ravens fan tells you. This team is legit. Be excited for this year. Enjoy it. Cheer for your guys. Who knows if we're going to see them in black and gold past this year, but at the very least, we have 16 games that we get to enjoy them in 2020. So with that being said, my name is Michael Beck. If you haven't listened to part one on the podcast platform, you can flip over that now. We talk over on the defensive side. Make sure to like the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, comment, subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast platform, 5 stars would go a long way for us. Even if you are listening on YouTube right now, just open up Spotify or your Apple podcast app, hit that 5-star button, because when you search us on Apple Podcasts, we are the number 2 Steelers related podcast right now. If you search that word up, and we want to be number 1. So give us that 5-star rating, and make sure to comment, make sure to share it, make sure to just flip over to behindthesteelcurtain.com and read great daily articles. The whole team here loves putting them out for you guys. So with that being said, I'm going to sign off here with you guys tonight. Thanks for tuning along with me. It's always a pleasure to bring you the live mic, and I'm excited to talk to you guys again next week. As always, make sure to tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Have a great